I'm Gavin Clark with the National Museum of Computing and Reading Museum, and we're interviewing former employees and customers of Digital Equipment Corporation as part of the 60th anniversary of DEC opening its first office in the United Kingdom. It's December the 13th, 2023, and we are in Reading, and I'm here today talking to David Probert. David, let's start with the basics first of all. Please tell us your full name and your place and your year of birth.
Okay, David Probert. I was born in 1951 and I was brought up in the town of Hemel Hempstead in Hertfordshire.
And your background, your education and your parents?
My father actually worked for the Government Ministry of Transport, first of all in London, then Hemel Hempstead. Then he moved down to Swansea to run the personnel division of the DVLA, the Vehicle Licensing Authority. So very much a sort of government non-scientific environment. I was actually the first guy in the family to go to university and to study seriously. So from my childhood, I went to Bristol University, studied mathematics, did quite well. I was also lucky to win a scholarship from British Telecom, and during vacations I would go and work at the British Telecom research labs at that time in Dollis Hill in London, working on teletraffic engineering. So I got a good taste for statistics then. Given I got good results in my maths degree, I went on to Cambridge University and studied under Professor Peter Whittle, a PhD in self-organizing systems, which today you would call machine learning, statistical machine learning. Again, it was actually probably the first PhD in that topic at Cambridge or anywhere in the UK at that time. I started in '73, so 50 years ago, which is very early days for what we today call artificial intelligence. I decided after my PhD I'd go back and work for a while with British Telecom, developed their very first strategic computer model in Fortran 70. Wrote all the code myself, created a color graphics interface, control systems. Quite hot stuff for that time. Had some trips to the States, AT&T, Bell Labs over in Murray Hill. And I even spent a couple of weeks in Mexico with the Telefonistas de Mexico, helping them develop similar computer models.
Now, how old were you by this point?
I was I was 22 when I started my PhD. When I started my work in BT again, 25. Finished the model. It was a 2-year contract then. Finished the model, and when I was 27, again it was very well received in British Telecom, and I was asked to use the model for strategic planning during the British Telecom privatisation, which took place during the early 80s. So worked directly to a member of the British Telecom main board, gave several presentations to the board of directors and staff. And as a result of that, got engaged with digital. It was I was one of the guys that was asked to manage a strategic partnership with Digital Equipment Corporation down in Reading here.
Okay, so let's go back a little bit. So you mentioned a couple of interesting things there. One was Dollis Hill, which a lot of people in the tech industry be familiar with.
Yeah.
It's obviously an iconic location. A lot of telecoms research happened there before it moved off to BT, Martlesham.
Yes.
What was Dollis Hill like at that point? What did you see?
It's a large enterprise with, I forget how many divisions there were about 20 divisions, all focusing on one of the areas of where the optical fibre research. I was assigned to basically the maths division. It was, I still remember, it was our research division 9.31. We worked as mathematicians at desks, like in a laboratory. We just had a notepad. We did our equations. We had some basic computers there. In fact, in that time I was using Algol 68 with a teletype, 50 baud per second teletype, sort of golf ball computer, I think. But I mean, very, very slow. So you program the computer and then it would be run in background mode. There was no real-time stuff. So I was working on the implications of adding noise to digital communication systems called pulse code modulation. So I published my first research paper in June 1970. It's actually online on the internet. And I was 19 years old then, so quite young. But the culture was very, you could say, sort of post-World War II. You know, it was still that very strong government orientation. It's still very secretive. Each division was doing its own stuff.
Was it very formalised?
And when
very
I look at the
structured?
movies, I think, well, that's what it was like in Dollis Hill in the early 1970s. And I did a similar stint in teletraffic engineering at BT in 71.
And was it the culture very formalised and conservative and structured? at
Very,
Dollis Hill?
very conservative. I mean, in those days you had a typing pool, and we had a special typing pool for doing mathematics equations. So you'd write your stuff hand scribed. It would go to the typing pool, then you get it back, then you do all the corrections, then you send it. And the typing pool was literally a room full of mainly ladies. I think they were all ladies, you know, typing on the machine. So very formalised, very, very bureaucratic. I didn't meet the director of Dollis Hill. You know, it was not networked in the way that digital was.
And it's a very interesting remote location in North London as well, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. It is, as it says, Dollis Hill, right on top of the hill. I used to, at lunchtime, sometimes go through Gladstone Park down to the metro station and take a train to London, go to some bookshops, come back again. But very remote. I was in digs in Kenton at that time, just as I commuted up there. But yeah, very remote location. And it's only more recently I've read about its role in World War II with the bunkers underneath and how it was going to be an evacuation centre for the British government during the wartime.
What was the so at this point you're doing mathematics by hand, but what was your first experience of computers? I
was using computers. As I say, I was programming in Algol 68 in 1970. I forget. I think it was a Geisco computer. I forget completely what designation, but you didn't see the computers there. It was all online, and I don't even know whether it was hosted in Dollis Hill or elsewhere in London.
And then you move into BT, and you're writing strategic plans for them as well. Is this starting to turn into some
when I was
work?
moving into BT, that was in '76. We were working on, again, remotely on an IBM 360, 370 computers. With teletype terminals. It was a very large computer model that I was programmed back. It was about 5,000, 6,000 lines of Fortran code. You would compile it and then set up the parameters for the particular business scenario you're modeling, finance, the manpower, limits, equipment, modernization. And then I had initially sort of alphanumeric plots for the graphs. This clearly wasn't good enough, and after a couple of years, I actually went to Marshall. I saw how they were doing VLSI design.
And what is that?
VLSI design, they had these pretty high-tech color monitors. So this is designing chips, as they were in those days, for particular telecommunications applications. And they had monitors where they had all the color-coded lines for the particular layers of the chips, the connections between transistors, resistors, capacitors, and so forth. And it was, I had the vision, well, we can use this for computer planning. We can use the same CAD, computer automated, CAD systems, for mapping the plots, the outputs from business scenarios. So I managed to convince my manager at that time to spend, I think it was £12,000, quite a lot of money in those days, on computer monitors, a touchpad, control systems. And then I was working like 12 hours. I personally wrote all the code in Fortran for a color graphics monitor to drive this system, and so that when you would run the system on the IBM remotely, all the results come back in a big database, and then that would go into the color graphics monitor. And it was pretty much the first generation of that sort of application at that time, to have business graphics in quasi real time. With multiple overlays, differences between the previous scenario, the next scenario, whether the financials were better, worse, the rates of modernization. You could do all these comparisons and see it in multiple colors on the screen. I should also add, I designed and coded a sort of Windows-based example. You could actually put these in Windows, and so forget about Microsoft. You know, it was still on MS-DOS at those days. We made a Windows system. So I did a lot of early work in programming software for BT before we even started working with digital.
So at this point, you haven't had any experience of digital systems, or had you?
No. Well, what happened, about 1983, we were approached by Digital because they knew of we were part of what was called long range and strategic studies. So we did stuff that was like 20, 30 years out, you know, optical fibers, video conferencing, stuff which is mainstream nowadays. And they wanted a site to test run their new range of laptop computers and PCs.
What were the Rainbow systems?
The Rainbows and the Professional. So I voted, I'll test run the DEC Professional because I wanted something that I could program. And so for it was a year or two, we were using these systems before they came to market. Professional was quite good. I managed to program it and actually use it as an interface for the British Telecom's model. Quite a good system, really robust given the strength of Digital's computing technology.
So these were your first taste of DEC, the Rainbow and the Professional.
That's right.
Systems. And how were they? I mean, you said they're robust. Obviously, DEC didn't do terribly well on computers, but how did you find them?
I found them. They were. Well, I think robust is a good word. They lacked certain flexibility when it came to networking or connecting to printers, email. There was a system that they also launched at the time called All-in-One with email and so forth. But it was very much a closed world, a bit like AOL, you know, it's American Online, you know, Chinese walled gardens. So it worked really well, but it wasn't good for networking to the rest of the world. You're in your DEC world of personal computers, all-in-one, and so forth, which was a restriction, I think.
What was as a user in a program, what was the quality like? Was it, you said robust, I mean, really solid systems, easy to use?
Really solid, never crashed. No technical problems. You know, it worked and booted up 100%. Because these were really old disk systems. I mean, these were big floppy disks. I forget whether they were like 12-inch, 8-inch, or whatever, but never failed, as some of the modern systems that I've had have failed quite early on.
Can you describe what one of them looked like? Were they like, as we imagine, a desktop or a laptop?
Well, this was like a big, like a military monitor. I mean, the Professional was about that size. I mean, it was that deep, and they probably weighed at least 10 or 15 kilos, I would imagine. I forget now. But a pretty big piece, big asset on your desktop together with the keyboard and so on. So, yeah, you need a pretty robust desk as well.
And what was the outcome of this pilot? Did it go ahead?
Yes, it's from what I remember, we all had digital systems. I think there were VT100s, VT200s. And we all started using email. We also experimented with some Philips word processing kit as well. I think that actually predated the digital trial, but pretty much everyone, apart, strangely enough, from the boss of our unit, I won't name him, our boss was resistant to email. Secretary, please print out all my emails for the day and I'll go through them. But the rest of us, I mean, we were pretty young then. I was 30 years old. You know, we just went straight into email and into this new world. I mean, there was no going back. I typed all we had a small typing pool, never used them. Typed out all my documents from, you know, early 1980s.
So that's an interesting point. How did the arrival of this DEC, the systems, the Rainbow, the Professional, and all-in-one, you know, networking, your emailing, how is this kind of transforming the way you and your team work?
Whole new world. Meant documents could be turned around quickly. You could do a draft and then just, you know, a few hours later have a meeting to discuss it. In the old days, you'd write your draft and then, you know, maybe a few days or even a week later you would get the typed version and you would edit, it would go back again, and it was just completely transformed working practice within an office like ours. There was absolutely no going back.
Was this is obviously your first proper taste of DEC. Were you aware of other PC makers out there, and did you get a chance to compare and contrast their systems?
I did do some programming on an original, I guess it was an Apple Macintosh. What was it called? VisiCalc 123. Did some modelling on that. Actually, I loved it because I know this came from Xerox PARC's Smalltalk, I think the language Apple actually took, and it was to be honest, the Apple Macintosh was far more intuitive and easier to program than the DEC PCs. I mean, I don't want to be an advocate completely of digital, even though I worked for them and loved the company, but the Apple Macintosh was a very positive experience. The weakness of Apple was that it wasn't computationally strong enough or robust enough for the sort of modeling that I was doing. Good for simple models, spreadsheet modeling, but not for your corporate business models with thousands of parameters.
What did the DEC systems have that made them suited? Was it just the size of the processors?
It was easier for me to program them and to link them into back-end systems. Like I could have a front end of a DEC Professional hooked into, I forget what I was using for its network protocol, but I could hook it into the IBM 360, 370 and send parameters backwards and forwards. I was unable to do that with the Apple Macintosh at that time.
So this is your first taste of DEC, but as we discussed earlier, your career is moving up into more strategic roles, isn't it? So
that's right. So during the privatization, we had a program. I think I can say what it is now. It was called IT Overlay. There was a proposal for BT to make some joint ventures, acquisitions in the computing and IT industry. I actually presented this myself to the board. I think it was probably in '83 or '84. A very comprehensive, fully financed set of business plans. But after some, pretty intensive discussion, the board decided it was going to be too complicated to go forward with this, given that the potential shareholders were already being written to regarding, investments and so forth. They didn't want this added complication. But as a result of this, though, I got to know most of the board members in BT. Including John Alvey, who actually spearheaded what was called the UK government Alvey programme.
What was that?
Alvey programme, it's worth mentioning because there were several segments, including VLSI, and more importantly, one segment on artificial intelligence, which was called Intelligent Knowledge-Based Systems. We didn't call it AI in those days because it was sort of like persona non grata. AI was the bad boy of the industry. It was something that Sir James Lighthill said, it won't work. It's just for guys that want to build robots instead of having children. I mean, there was a very denigrating report written by Lighthill in the 70s. As a result of that, AI was, you didn't do AI, but you could do expert systems, intelligent knowledge-based systems.
What are expert systems and intelligent knowledge-based systems?
Right, expert systems are based on a set of rules. You would have it's like a database, but you would have rules which may be for drugs. So you say related to particular drugs, maybe antibiotics, when you should take them, the precognitions, the times when you shouldn't take them, side effects. And a doctor could say, well, I've got a patient with these symptoms. What doses should I use of this particular penicillin? What side effects should I look for? And the expert system would give advice as if it was a human expert. And these were, there's one of the systems was called MySyn. It was developed by one of the, I forget, it was Carnegie Mellon or one of these US universities. Very successful at the time. So UK government got into this, decided it was a good thing to invest in. Intelligent knowledge-based systems was sort of an extension of expert systems into vision analysis, semantic, natural language processing, engineering. And we would meet, I think pretty much once a month. We would have a portfolio of proposals from like Manchester University, Imperial College, Cambridge, Edinburgh. They would all be competing for funds, typically millions of pounds, to finance, let's say, and Manchester was very keen on voice analysis and so forth. Imperial was very strong. There was Bob Kowalski doing Prolog language engineering and Lisp engineering, and Cambridge was doing man-machine interfaces. So we would approve projects, in general, collaborative projects between industry and universities. So I represented British Telecom on this UK government committee, sort of an early AI initiative from Britain.
So let's talk about, so you're at BT, you're involved in strategic long-range planning and vision setting and that kind of area. You end up, you said earlier, you get placed in charge of BT's DEC account somehow. Tell us what that meant.
Yeah, what it meant in 85, it was September 85, myself and a colleague, I'll just call him Stuart for a moment, and he was assigned to run the technical side of a strategic partnership with DEC. I was running the marketing and strategy side of the project. So we were the BT team, and the mission was to engineer a commercial solution that linked VAX computers, DEC VAX computers, with British Telecom's PABXs, private automatic branch systems. These are the sort of exchanges you have in businesses, particularly larger businesses.
So these are telephone systems?
These are telephone systems linked with computer systems. No one had linked them together before.
Calls coming into offices and turning them and connecting those calls to computers for...
That's right. At this time, ISDN was moving mainstream. There was a protocol called Q931 ISDN, and with this 16K, I mean very slow, you could send data between a computer and a telephone switch, and this was all you needed to have essentially a virtual switch inside the computer, and vice versa. So you had this virtual connection, which today is called computer telephony integration. But at that time, we were actually defining the standards for this. And after 2 years, we came up with a commercial system that BT marketed as Stanza, STANZA, that was launched at Telecom 88, from what I remember.
So tell me, so what is the DEC account? So BT is using DEC equipment, or it's customers
BT is using DEC equipment, but we had a number of strategic ventures. We really wanted, because BT didn't invest in IT during the privatisation, they still wanted strategic partnerships with major businesses within the IT sector. So DEC was seen to be a good fit for various reasons. And I mean, I had meetings in Geneva with, again, a number of the DEC strategists, and we worked on what were the elements of the strategic fit between BT strengths, technology strengths, and the DEC strengths, and it fitted together pretty well. I mean, what
were DEC strengths what seemed to be DEC strengths at this point?
The very strong on networked computer systems. So I myself and colleagues, we had a team of people, actually an architecture team. We would go over to the digital development labs in the East Coast in Littleton, Massachusetts. We would spend a week or two with their team that were pioneering the Ethernet. Ethernet was early days. DEC pioneered Ethernet. IBM was very strong on token ring. Ethernet actually won the day. And we were very much interested in metropolitan area networks, wide area networks, LANs, to extend the telephone network into businesses, into homes. So the fact that DEC was the strongest company, and it actually worked with Ethernet, we thought they were far better fit than IBM. And that was the way we went. So we, myself and colleague, we actually we briefed the chairman of British Telecom, Sir Ian Vallance, before a meeting that he had with Ken Olsen, chairman of DEC. They met in Davos at the Davos Economic Forum in, I think that would have been spring 1986. This strategic partnership went right up to the top of the businesses, and it was seen to be a key element of BT's development into the computing sector, not just being telephones because
Making telephone traffic.
telephone traffic.
Talk to computers.
At that time, I mean, because I did all the modelling, I know all the background to that. But BT's projects profits at that time were predominantly from international telephone calls. They completely subsidised the local calls, and one of the areas that I've been working on was tariff rebalancing to increase the tariffs of local calls, trunk calls as they were called in those days, reducing the international dependence. But even with all that tariff rebalancing, BT was going to be commoditized, as the computing industry was already experiencing. So because of that commoditization, we needed to add value. We needed to get into value-added network services, which was another area that we had discussions with digital.
And what was the tenor that you briefed Ken, or you briefed BT about meeting Ken Olsen? What did you tell Sir Ian Vallance?
Well, we told him about the important, this was after several trips to their research labs, how key their research was to complementing BT's own research at Martlesham Heath. Whilst we were very strong on the optical fibres, the sort of the physical communications, with DEC, we could use all the softer side, the software, the protocols to extend our fibres into the home, into businesses. We also briefed him on the culture of digital. That Ken Olsen was a Quaker, and that it was very much a networked business, and that BT need to be careful that there was potentially a cultural mismatch that we needed to bridge between the hierarchical British Telecom's management style and the digital, very flat, matrixed, peer-to-peer style. So we went through the technology, the culture, and then in detail the projects that we were already negotiating regarding connecting the computers to telephone switches and also value-added services subsequently.
Was there an outcome? Did you see an outcome come from that, either immediately or long term?
Yeah, we very positive. We submitted plans to the main board of directors for research funding in Martlesham, and we received £10 million of funding for the first year, and we repeated that a year later in spring '87. So we were running roughly about a third of the divisions of Martlesham at that time, all the communications. We had architecture teams, and this was the first step in what was later to become the commercialisation of the Martlesham research. And in fact, my colleague that I worked with, Stuart, went on to become the chief executive of Martlesham. I mean, he ended up running the whole. This was after I'd already joined digital. So it was a very successful program. Another guy that we worked closely with was the BT head of strategy, Angus Walker. He was an inspirational mentor to us, as well as how to commercialise BT's very valuable research. We had a joint venture, for example, with DuPont, who were manufacturing fibre. So we had this joint venture, BT, DuPont, fibre optic components. It wasn't entirely successful, but it got the thought processes going. Also, BT acquired a 51% stake in Mitel, which I was quite involved with that. It wasn't so successful. In the end, Mitel bought back the BT stake.
So a number of ventures. And were you aware of BT, or how far was BT working with other computer companies? I mean, was DEC the only one, or were there other
DEC was the only one. It was.
Why was that? Purely because of the networking?
Well, partly the resources we needed to put into it. I mean, we were putting substantial funding. It was going great guns. There was no reason to back any other horses. We were buying other computer equipment. I mean, clearly IBM, and we were using their time systems. But there was no sharing at a research intellectual property level.
Right. And so you're in charge of the DEC account, and you guys great relationship, but then you switched from BT to DEC.
Well,
what happened and why?
What happened, it was very clear. We started to negotiate value-added network services.
Such as examples of, what's an example of that?
In the financial sector, running services maybe for solicitors, businesses, financial accountants, but a bit like cloud computing today, but having them in the back office, on computers run by digital, and telecommunications networks run by BT. We came to a sticking point in the negotiations between BT and DEC. This was a project, I think I can name it now, Project Thomas was what we called. But we had a big falling out. The BT was not happy. Digital, hosting and running all the computing services, time shared operations, whatever you want to call it, and BT just providing the telephone lines. It was felt that DEC was getting too big a chunk of the added value. So the big falling out, venture fall apart, and I thought, which side of the fence do I want to jump? I want to go to digital. That's where the future lies in terms of networking, communications, and I loved their culture. I mean, for 2 years, I've been immersed in their culture, working with their teams, and I really loved this idea of peer-to-peer networking, that the Quaker meeting room, putting up your hand, say, I'm going to do this, and being responsibility and given the budget to do it. And in BT, that wasn't really possible. I had a lot of control, a big budget, but it was still a very political organisation. And I was never really very good at politics. I didn't like the time I had to spend on these meetings and so forth. I wanted to get out there and do things.
So how did it go down? How did you make the leap? Did you start having conversations with people? Were there job interviews? Was
Yeah.
a role
Well,
available
the
for
way
you?
it happened, I was over in the States in 1986, and I met several of their vice presidents. I met Bill Strecker, who was sort of head of engineering strategy. Bill Johnson, BJ's, who was called head of all the Ethernet and so forth, and some other senior managers. And at that time, I think this was something like April '86, they put in a bid, say, Probert should come and work with us. I was already developing that time I would call it a sort of a visual calculus for looking at intelligent systems that I've used ever since. But they liked that. They thought, smart guy. We should employ him. So I didn't think anything of it at the time, but that was before the Vans operation fell apart. But when that happened, I put in a call to Bob Taylor, who was head of marketing in DEC Reading here, and said, well, I'm ready to jump the fence. I'm ready to join DEC now. Let's have a chat. So I had a couple of chats at Shire Hall down the road, which was where the DEC board, Jeff Shingles and so forth, hang out in those days. And they put in, I said, this is what I'd like, and as package, and we came to a decision. In August '87, I left BT. It was quite difficult. BT wasn't happy. First of all, it was out of the door, David. You're just going to walk out of the door with your bags. But my team supported me and said, no, he needs to stay at least a week to get sorted out and brief us. So I stayed a whole week and then joined Digital.
And what was the job title you had at Digital?
Initially, I was Special Projects Manager, which meant I was running artificial intelligence in UK, AI marketing, and value-added network services marketing.
But we're talking about AI not as we know it today. It's these intelligent
expert systems. These were like configuration systems for configuring VAX computers, for advising salespeople on how to connect systems together, which circuit boards to use and so forth. So not very intelligent by today's standards, very slow. But we still called it artificial intelligence because that's where the roots come from. I mean, they originally came back from AI, I was thinking about 1943 with the development of neural nets by McCulloch and Pitts, 80 years ago now. So AI's evolved, becomes more and more intelligent, more sophisticated. So that's where we were back in 1987.
So you have a special projects role and you're based here in Reading?
Based here in Reading, yeah. I was in Queen's House initially, which was then demolished, and then DEC Park.
What's Queen's House like? Because obviously it's gone now. Describe the building.
Well, I liked it. It was like a hexagon, it was sort of an octagon or hexagon. All the floors were round, car park in the basement, gymnasium facilities there. I was on the marketing floor with Dave Clark, was my manager there. And it was, you see, let's compare it with BT. BT had a big office. I was entitled to having a drinks cabinet, which I didn't. I had a PA, I had a secretary as well. DEC, all I had was, as you know in DEC, just a desk. And all the other guys were around me. So I had no real estate, I had no drinks cupboard, I had no personal secretary. But I loved it because for me this was freedom. I was sort of out of the cabinet. I didn't like the big office and the politics. I wanted to go out and make things happen. So it was like the Queen's House was like a donut, and you were next to all the people that you were working with. You just have side chats, coffee machine chats, and so forth. Very matrix. So even within AI, we had an AI guy, Pascal Coutier, down in Valbonne. We had Jack Ram over in the States. So we had these, peer-to-peer connections, which made life far more interesting, and it made things happen a lot faster. So in '88, we had one of our worldwide exhibitions in Cannes in France, DEC World '88. And for some reason, I became responsible for making the AI component happen. I think it's partly because I had a PhD in the space, which gave me a head and shoulders above everyone else. And I had a vision for how to present AI to the business community, which other guys didn't have. They had too much a techie position. So I said, well, you need to embed AI applications in the businesses, in the enterprises. You need to think of AI as a lens, something that gives focus. You may have a big database, a lot of information. What AI will do is, I called it a knowledge lens, takes that information, focuses it for the decision maker, whether they're a foreign exchange dealer or they're on a manufacturing production line or running a transportation logistics operation. It doesn't matter. AI is the lens. You need to embed these lenses within the enterprise, and everyone loved this idea. So we presented this at DEC World, and we linked together something like 10 or 12 different applications that DEC already had running on VAX computers, I think some were on PDPs, around the exhibition floor. So that gave me a very strong set of connections within the digital world, both in the UK, Europe, and over in the States.
Okay. Well, let's come back to, so you're at this office and then it becomes DEC Park. Describe DEC Park to us.
Well, DEC Park was like working in a technology factory, I guess. It was an environment like I'd never worked in before. We talked about Dollis Hill earlier. Dollis Hill, very much the World War II, government research lab. DEC Park, just, very, very American. As you may know, DEC started its operations in a mill, an old weaving mill in Maynard, Massachusetts. And it was structured with poles everywhere. So DEC Park was the same. We had poles, and everyone had a pole number, a desk near each thing. So you were like I-32, R-27, and that was your office code. And DEC Park, there's two parts: DEC Park 1, DEC Park 2. DEC Park 1, all the UK sales and marketing services, field service control. It was cool that the border management were mainly on the first floor, very accessible. Everyone was accessible. No one was in a locked office that you couldn't go to, ask questions, ask for funding, ask for advice. No one punished you for asking for advice. DEC Park 2, engineering operations, including some corporate engineering. Again, very inspirational for me that this was not some research lab like Marshall up the road, locked rooms, secret doors. This was all open. You could talk to the engineers, you could bring them into your meetings, you could get your ideas embedded in the next generation of engineering plans. So this is for the 1980s, we're ahead of the field really in terms of the way other UK businesses were running.
And what was we hear a lot about this kind of like road in the middle of DEC Park. I mean,
the street.
The street, sorry.
Street, yeah.
How was that? Did you meet people? Was it great?
Oh yeah, you would meet people. It was always a pleasure to. Later on, I was working when we were running the internet business. I was working in DEC Park 2 on the second floor. But you would always meet customers and partners at the front entrance of the street, and you would walk with them down the street. I always felt very proud doing that. You say, well, this is all, because they were usually quite inspired by, wow, this is amazing, David. Look, you work in this place, and who are those guys up there, and who are those there? And you had Barclays Bank there, you had the restaurant, other shops down there. A lot of European flags were down there. And it was very cultural. I mean, very inspirational culture, and it creates an environment in which you're very motivated to do your best. I think that's was a very important feature of digital. People would not just work, half work. They wouldn't be demoralised. They would give everything they could to make a project happen. They were passionately driving, working extra hours, travelling a lot more than they might want to, but as I was.
Why was this? Because we heard about this DEC culture of like people were given responsibility, do the right thing, and freedom to do what they could. But if you you had to take ownership of a project, didn't you?
You had to take ownership. You were allowed to fail, but not too often. I think, well, we could come back to the Quaker meeting room, of course. So the fact that you could volunteer to follow your dreams was, for me, important. I did that several times with the projects in Russia. I thought this is a market we really need to invest in. With the internet, I did the same. I think the internet is a good example, because I was assigned to work on this in November '91. I was given the task of negotiating for digital. It was actually a donation, but we provided the first international routers for all the countries of Eastern Europe. This was Poland, Czech Republic, which is one country, well, Czechoslovakia at that time when I started, Romania, Bulgaria, Russia, Ukraine, and I visited each of these countries. Met with, in all the cases, it was university research departments. How would they connect? Like in Czechoslovakia, it was CESNet, Czech Educational and Science Network. And it was, I mean, these were early days. I mean, the backbone networks typically were like, at the most, 2 megabit per second. And one thing to remember, digital was actually managing at this time the whole European internet. We had operations center in Sloterdijk, just northern Amsterdam. A colleague of mine from the States, Jerry Striplin, he was the operations manager, NOC, Network Operations Center, for this backbone network, which was upgraded to 34 megabits per second. So difficult to imagine nowadays, but all the internet traffic in Europe was going through this center in Sloterdijk that was running on digital system. And that was the case until mid-90s, when it became commercialized.
So these are DEC systems?
These are all DEC systems.
Do you know which systems broadly we're talking about?
Oh, it was a high-end VAX cluster. I couldn't put a number to it at that time because Alpha hadn't been launched. Later on, these were all Alpha-based, Alpha farms, XP farms, and so on.
Well, how did DEC end up in this situation that it could be running such a cornerstone of the internet at this early time?
Because pretty much every university in Europe, United States, were running their research applications on PDP systems. If you look at the early internet, I was looking at one of these plans early this morning. Back in 1973, pretty much the whole internet was running on PDP systems, or the routers service. It was the whole backbone network was digital. I went to Russia in the early 90s. What were they running on? They were running on replicas, clone systems mainly of PDP systems. There were 2 species. There were SM systems, which are the IBM, and then there's I forget what the digital acronym was, but these were systems that were reverse engineered, typically in Hungary. There was a research center called Starkey in Budapest. They were reverse engineering and developing clones of DEC systems.
Was this legal?
No, completely illegal, of course. But what's interesting, the research team at Starkey, we recruited. We thought, well, they know more about DEC systems than we do. We'll hire them, and they became the backbone of digital Hungary. So and we had an amnesty. I mean, same in Russia. There were some systems that were legal. I visited Protvino near Moscow. They had a DEC 10, I think DEC 20 system as well, legally installed as part of the CERN network. Protvino was the Russian high energy physics center. There was also a similar system at Dubna, north of Moscow, Joint International Network Research, they had official digital systems. So if they were connected with the Western European sort of physics community, they could legally get systems. And just a little story, at an early meeting in Moscow, one of the Russian directors came up to me, "Hey David, you know, do we buy computers from you now?" I said, "Yes." "Well, where do you get them at the moment?" "Oh, we buy them from a dealer in Dresden in East Germany." So that told you everything. They were buying cloned systems. But you asked me, why was digital running the European backbone network? Because this was their currency. This was the university guys had been using these systems ever since DEC launched in 1957.
And because they were reliable, very fast,
yeah, and
great capacity.
flexible, easy to program, as I found, easy to network, link with other systems. So these, guys, they did their undergraduate work, PhD work, and then they did their proper research work later on these systems. It was part of their mentality.
So DEC systems are not just running the internet, the physical infrastructure, but the skills transfer is taking on people leave these systems and take their skills to other employers, and so the DEC technology is kind of like proliferating out into the field.
That's right. It went particularly into the finance sector. I mean, certainly until a few years ago, the banks, foreign exchanges, they were still using these PDP systems. Energy sector as well. A lot of these for SCADA systems, industrial control systems, they're called ICS, or running process control on digital systems, because they were very technically complete, well architected systems that were ideal for your technology engineers in energy or the financial businesses and so forth, and other systems weren't so adapted.
So you're based in Reading, and you're doing a large amount of European work, and you've made the switch, it sounds like, from AI and sort of a few projects to now to the internet, haven't you? And you're in marketing, in a marketing role, and a biz dev role rather than a technology role.
Particularly in the early 90s, I mean, digital was desperate for new markets to move from product into services. So we made a big play with the internet. In the educational sector, I was promoting and selling systems. Well, not selling them myself, but I was marketing until about sort of spring '94. But then this bridge came when it became acceptable use policy. It became possible for you to send commercial traffic over the internet backbone. That happened in about sort of late '94. And there was a pivotal conference in Prague in June '94. It was the International Internet, basically worldwide internet conference. And I was on the platform with a number of influential guys. There was Vint Cerf, who was the co-designer of the internet, and I sat next to Eric Schmidt, which was he was technology director of Sun Computers then, and I was marketing director for internet in Europe. But it was clear as a result of that. Well, also IBM were there, and IBM made a play for me. And about 2 weeks after the conference, hey Dave, come over to White Plains and become our VP for the internet. I said, well, I've got 4 kids. Can I take the 4 kids? No. We came to the point that I couldn't remote work. I would have to move and relocate to White Plains. I said, no, not possible. So
what was you mentioned you wrote an internet plan for DEC. What was the internet plan for DEC?
So the internet plan said, what I'd like is funding for 10 heads, 10 technology marketing people, and I'd like to start seeding Europe to begin with what we call Eagle projects. Now, an Eagle project is a really high profile proof of concept. So, for example, one of the Eagle projects we had was to invest as a sponsor in the world's first supersonic car. I mean, these were wild projects, which were big risks, may have failed. So it just happened to be at the right time. I was asked, well, hey, Dave, there's a chance that you could meet with Richard Noble, discuss sponsoring the world's first supersonic car. So I met with Richard. In fact, the story is I was told the day before, Richard's coming to see us. What do you want to do? That night I sat at home over my laptop then and wrote a protocol. I wrote a memorandum of understanding, said, we will run the website for this project. We will do the first online video, and it's on the internet. You can read the concise the program, but it was.
Why is this important? Because websites are so penny now.
Well, there weren't so many websites then. There was no browsers. This was in February '95. There was Netscape browsers. There weren't that many websites. They weren't indexed. There was no search engines. No one had got shops online then, pretty much. There were no net magazines, hardly. No one had done crowdsourcing. No one had very few videos online. So we wanted to show that you could, well, I wanted to show you could put multimedia on the net. I'd seen it with Mosaic from, I think, NCSA over in the States, that you could put coffee pots on the net from Cambridge University. I wanted to do a lot more than that. I wanted to put a supersonic car, breaking the sound barrier to really get people to go online to see what was possible. And the bottom line, we actually did all that. We put the video online, we did crowdsourcing, we put one of the very first internet shops online, secure internet shops with SSL, encryption, using an Irish company called Trintech to link to NatWest Bank for all the security. And it was a great proof of concept that brought people to the internet. On the day that the world record was broken, I think October 15th, 97. Might have been the 17th. Anyway, Microsoft records our site was the busiest website in the world on just that day. But that was for us, and we handled it. The computers were run out of Newbury, out of Newbury Business Park. I mean, very local, West Berkshire. We got to the point, actually, those systems couldn't even handle the load. There was so much traffic coming through, and we had to transfer them to some NASA systems over in the States. So massively successful. Another project that we did was the ColarNet project up in the Russian Arctic. Again, sort of quite wild. This ColarNet was set up about 6 years after the Chernobyl disaster, and we wanted to show that you could use our technology to improve the environment. And there's a large nuclear power station in the Kola Peninsula. And we said, well, what we could do is to use network technology and networks of sensors to detect if there's a radiation leak, and then in real time arrange for evacuation of citizens or whatever else needs to happen, far quicker and far more openly than happened at Chernobyl. So we brought together with a colleague of mine, Dr. Alexander Baklanov, who's actually still working for the United Nations in Geneva, but at that time he was a Russian scientist. Anyway, he and I got together. We pulled together a consortium of scientists in Norway, Sweden, Finland. We brought Dornier from Germany, and of course digital from America, myself from the UK. So we had a real international consortium, all supported by the respective governments, which you can't really conceive of today happening, to be quite honest. And for 7 years we had conferences, meetings, seminars. One of my other main contacts in Russia was Dr. Alexander Rimsky-Korsakov, the great-grandson of the composer. He died a couple of years ago, but at that time he was Director General of the Radiation Institute in St. Petersburg. So we signed an early protocol, in fact, in March 92, and we started putting in networks of sensors in the Kola nuclear power station.
So these are DEC systems?
Yeah, they were. And initially they were like Russian systems, but subsequently they were DEC systems.
Which ones, do you remember?
No, I didn't. We put them in most of the nuclear power stations with Dornier. So Dornier was like the prime contractor, and then all the computers were digital systems to Rosatom, I think it is nowadays. Just as an anecdote on the Kola power station, we put in the first systems in, I know it must have been about June 92, and Sasha Rimsky-Korsakov, he sends me a message. I forget, it must probably by telex in those days. So, hey David, you'll be interested to know that we just put in the first systems to sense the radiation. Do you know what happened? Well, we know that they were working because the guys were pulling out the fuel rods. And the monitors were going to zoom, Geiger counters getting very excited, all going into the red zone. So what are the engineers doing when they're pulling out the fuel rods? Turned off all this new technology. Look, hey guys, we always said it wouldn't work. Let's just keep on changing the fuel rods. It's obviously, you can't be going into the red zone. So we understood from that very important, very early on, run training courses. Don't put in technology unless you've trained the people first. That was another initiative that we made within, not just in Russia, all over Europe. We started running internet training courses. We conceptualized this as the internet clinic. We had a number of presentations. We put them on CDs, internet security, internet chat, browsing or whatever. We would go in teams of 2, usually with a couple of laptops with us, to a customer, and we'd spend the whole day with them. We'd let them, like a Quaker prayer meeting, we'd say, well, what would you like to hear about, guys? We can tell you about security, we can design a website together. And we'd let them control the agenda, and we had all the materials on the disk. And we'd do sort of interactive training, not yet sort of lecture 1, lecture 2, lecture 3. This was fantastically successful, to be honest. We went all over Europe, Middle East, South Africa. I did a week there with a colleague, Andy. So training is a key component whenever you're moving into new generation technology.
So it's very much priming the market for the internet. So DEC is not just running important corners of the internet, it's actually teaching people how to use the internet as users and how to construct facets of the website.
That's right. That very, very important point, because people thought of the internet just as another network protocol. They thought it was insecure, and that it was just for techies, basically. They knew it came from universities. They didn't understand that this was going to become the mainstream tool for business. We told people then, this is going to change society. This is going to change the world, the way we live. No one believed us then, in the mid-90s. We were like apostles. I mean, I have to say, we were passionate. This was going to happen. I don't know how we knew or why so we made it happen. We were so excited by this technology, but we understand people needed to know they had hands-on experience to use it. This was not to do with techie stuff. This was quite soft. Of course, we moved into social media, and we had our first web forum. We had Alta Vista Web Forum, which was the sort of precursor of social media and chat and so forth.
But you were also creating internet kiosks, weren't you? Tell us about what is an internet kiosk and what is DEC's technology in that?
Not everyone had typical internet in those days was dial-up, 8K per second or something. I mean,
which is what, picking up
just pick up a telephone and go, pew, 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 you get all your tones. If you could exchange and update your email, send some emails, and you couldn't do a lot more. You couldn't transmit videos or so forth. So we thought, well, a lot of people wanted to access the internet then, and had no possibilities. So we said, well, what about internet cafes and so forth? Well, there must be a market for kiosks, so that, ready, just a laptop, a screen, a keyboard, so that people pay maybe £1 an hour or whatever, price doesn't really matter, with having a dedicated connection to the internet. So we started to experiment. We said, well, what's a good tool for having an internet kiosk? Well, Digital Sweden had already done a deal with a banking company, and we had these ATM machines. We started using these at exhibitions and conferences around Europe. We minted some credit card, sort of ATM cards, and
what was on those cards?
Well, we put cyber shopping with digital. We wanted people to have an idea, not just of browsing. We wanted people to get an idea of shopping online, of e-commerce, because we saw that was a key direction of not just the technology, the way the marketplace was going. So it was just a mag stripe card.
And what's the data on that card?
It was just the number of units. It was just a time. You had 15 minutes of surfing time, and then it would time out. We put a picture of an artistic impression of the supersonic car to show that this was a fast system running on alpha 64-bit systems. And of course, the digital came up with the first Alta Vista browser, again in '96, engineered by our team in the Palo Alto research labs over in the
Just come back
States.
to the kiosks. How popular were they? Were these? Did people like these things? Was it?
Yeah, right. Now, it was sort of a shame that they were just sort of getting the market traction when the Compact acquisition came, and we all left. So it came to, we codenamed it Sphinx. We produced brochures and so forth. So very successful. We couldn't make we made them as a prototype. We just couldn't get enough made, to be honest. Whenever we shipped them somewhere, oh, can we keep them? We can't. We shipped one to St. Petersburg. We're not going to give it back, they said. We're going to keep it now. So that was it. You knew if you shipped it, they would fall in love with them. And
so what were they? An ATM system with DEC
the
equipment?
later ones, the first ones were these really, I use the word robust a lot, but really heavy. You needed a crane to lift them. The later ones just had a molded plastic shell that we had hand custom made, a digital laptop in the base, screen, just a flat screen, and keyboard and a roller board. That's all it was, and a cable connecting the screen to the laptop, and then connection plugged into the internet. No more than that. Nothing to them at all. No rocket science, but it was just a sexy design. We did them in different colours, blue, green, red. Just a plastic, acrylic shell.
DEC hardware or software inside there?
It was all DEC hardware, software. Yeah. It was just absolutely bog standard. Well, it wasn't a laptop, it was a not even a server. It was just a desktop system in the base there that you just put in, so you could ship the shell, then you could hand carry the computing unit just plugged into the screen. So very, very simple technology. That's what made it so attractive.
And you mentioned several times that Alta Vista. Tell us a little bit. Obviously, that creation came from the United States, but what did that mean in terms of DEC's business? What was it achieving that others couldn't achieve?
Well, it tied it all together. It was the next stage for moving from the technology base of the internet, and internet as TCP/IP protocol, to the social media and browsing world.
What was Alta Vista?
Alta Vista was technically it was, you'd have these robots that would go all around the internet, pick up little bits of information and bring them to the sort of the Alta Vista browsing database. And the magic of Alta Vista is that it was able to take every website, every piece of data, and put them into one mega database index with a 64-bit address. And with that, you can index everything on the net and a lot more. I mean, it's big enough for indexing. I'm not sure about atoms in the universe, but I mean, 2 to the 60. Yeah, it's a.
So you could have the whole internet.
You had the whole internet in core memory.
On one server or clustered servers?
Clustered servers. I mean, your clustered servers. If you look at the way Google does this now, and they have massive farms next to a hydroelectric power station, so it's networked cards. I mean, when I say server, it's just a server on a card.
What was the magic of Alta Vista? Its speed, its comprehensive nature?
The first time anyone had been able to engineer a system where you could type in a search term and find the website. Before this, you would buy your .NET magazine, and it had a list of websites to go to, but there was no way you could search for information on, classic cars or antique books or whatever. There was no website except index sites. So Alta Vista was the first browser-initiated complete index of the web. People said it was impossible to do before we launched it, that you can't do that. You can't put the whole web onto one cluster server. They really didn't believe it was possible. So it was a revolution in search in 96, 97. say 2 years before Google. And I mean, Google took that concept. I mean, and works in the same way. And then they were, unlike digital, they were clever enough to monetize it, which we weren't so hot on that, I have to say. So that was a major selling point for digital. As well as the public Alta Vista, we were able to re-engineer this for enterprises. So we had like an intranet version, so you could have all your company data and index that with Alta Vista. We had a PC version, you indexed everything on your PC. It was the first time people had been able to do that.
So this is very high time. So you're in Reading at this point again, or where are you in all this?
Yeah, I was always, my office was always in Reading. This was in Deck Park 2. We had our team of 10 were virtually hosted there. I had a team that included Henri from Paris, Peter and Victor. Well, Peter from Stockholm. Victor was in Copenhagen. I had Lejik in Vienna. We had a virtual team, but all hosted out of Reading. In addition to that, every country we appointed an internet marketing manager. So there was like Massimo Ravelli in Italy, and he was a great guy. He managed to get us the website in the Vatican City, and we had El Corte Inglese in Spain from the Spanish guy. So every country we had, I guess we had at least 20 internet managers in the countries that were networked. We translated most of our marketing materials into French, German. I think we even did some Turkish stuff. We did some Arabic stuff, Hebrew, Russian, Ukrainian.
How did it feel? I mean, DEC comes from a heritage of systems, big systems, reliable. Did the culture of the internet division, was it noticeably different in any way to other parts of DEC, or was that not a factor, do you feel?
Yeah, we were different to the rest of the DEC. Sometimes it created some friction, that we were too marketing, that it was wasting money maybe even. But this was, we were religious about this. We said this is the way to go. We need to get away from this. Technology is our heart, but we need a body to go with it. We need the services. We need some entrepreneurial flair to bring this to not just sort of techie business customers. We need to bring it to the advertising warehouses and other manufacturing companies. So,
and how have you seen DEC change during this time? Obviously, you've been there for a large. The internet has taken off around everybody. You're based in Reading. Did you see any changes? The company grow and change during this time, during your era at the company as well?
The 90s were a difficult time for digital. I mean, there was every quarter almost, there would be downsizing. We had too many staff. Our profits were not what they should have been. So again, this was one thing which created resentment, that we weren't a techie team as such, even though many of us had technical background, including myself. So difficult times. We were trying to bridge the old world and the new world. I guess we didn't quite make it because we were acquisited by Compaq. But we just felt we knew in our heart we were doing the right thing. This was the way the market was going. If digital was going to survive in the long term, we needed to really promote Alta Vista, browsing, internet security, what is called cyber security nowadays. We created the first DMZ, dual military zone, dual firewalls. We created the first VPN, which we called the DEC tunnel, which was an encrypted pipe between two servers. There was not widespread recognition that this was pioneering stuff. They said, "Oh, interesting, yes, it's quite good stuff."
Is this because of the culture? Is it more of a kind of big systems culture?
Yeah, I think that was why that we needed.
So let's talk about just focusing back on Reading a little bit. So of course you were based in Reading, and you were meeting very notable Russian figures as well, and it's got a strong family connection for you as well, because obviously your wife you met your wife through work as well, I take
That's
it.
Right,
and
yes.
Tell us a little bit about how you met, the circumstances you met, and then there's kind of a matrimonial connection with Reading, isn't there? What happened?
Yeah,
there?
so I met my wife Valentina in the early, well, it was actually in early '93. up in the Kola Peninsula when we were starting to work on the KolaNet project. Valentina was managing international relations in the Russian Academy of Sciences. The Russian Academy of Sciences has these institutes all over Russia, and in the Kola Peninsula there's the Kola Science Center, which is one of the branches, and Valentina was running the cultural international foreign relations. So that's how we met. We actually married in '97, April '97, in a church just next door where we're recording this interview today, in Abbey Baptist Church, and lived initially in Reading and then moved. We've lived the last 27 years in Newbury, just walking distance from where DEC had its networking offices there. Great place to live. I met a number of interesting people in Russia.
Who did you meet?
I was meeting. I mean, one of my early meetings was with Boris Butenko, Minister of the Postal Services there. This came from a connection in Canada, where we had a lot of interesting business with Canadian Post. Anyway, I met with Boris in March '92. We spent about an hour together, and he said, you should see my guy Vladimir Uzalevsky in St. Petersburg. He runs Technopost, that does all the technology for the Russian Post Office. And we worked together over a number of years. We started working on tracking and tracing of post, which was quite a novelty in Russia. And we got our first contract in northern Komi region, north of St. Petersburg, all based on digital computing technology. So yeah, we had a role in modernizing the Russian Post. Through Uzalevsky, I sponsored and presented at the very first Russian Postal Conference in November '92. And what is interesting is that conference on the platform, there was Boris Butenko, the minister, Vladimir Uzalevsky, and a certain deputy minister for economic affairs, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Uzalevsky wanted me to meet Vladimir. Unfortunately, I was rather late for the conference. We'll call him Mr. Putin. He had to leave early for an urgent meeting in Moscow, so we didn't actually connect, for better or for worse. But it was just an interesting day. And now, on my very first trip to Russia in December '91, we sponsored the European Youth Orchestra in the Moscow Conservatory and invited various senior figures, not knowing whether they turned up. But yes, Mr. Gorbachev and his wife Raisa came and sat in the box just above where we were sitting. And another very strange thing happened. I think it was in about '93. I was sitting in Sheremetyevo Airport in just the normal public lounge, and then who's that walking past? He's got a port wine stain on his head. It's Gorbachev again. He was walking with security guards and his wife through the public lounge on a trip to Germany. I later read. So yeah, I met the Minister of the Environment, Danielev, relating to the KolaNet project. So we were working as well. I mean, it wasn't just me, it was the whole of the digital Moscow, Russia organization, working at a very high level within the government ministries then. I should also, to just balance it, we were working in Ukraine, similar high levels. One of our first projects, certainly that I was engaged with, was the first website and fiber network for the Ukrainian parliament, the Verkhovnaya Rada. So I was asked to go to Kiev. I gave training courses and seminars on internet security for the Ukrainian government workers. I also provided, systems for Donetsk, for the Donetsk Technical University, which, as we know, is in the heart of Donbass. And also in Odessa, there's a very famous telecommunications research institute that we provided an early system. And we seeded these systems. We were a kind company, but we knew they'd be used for the internet, and then people would buy more systems subsequently. And we installed systems for the Central Bank of Ukraine. So we were very active in both Ukraine, Russia, also Georgia. I was responsible for the first website for the Georgian Parliament in '94, December '94. And since then, since I left digital, I've done a lot of work in Georgia under the auspices of the United Nations, including an audit of the Georgian Parliament, security, and many of the other ministries there. So I have remained active in those countries: Georgia, Armenia, Russia.
So you've had a huge personal journey with DEC, haven't you?
Yes, it was all through DEC. So this all came through my decision to leave the bureaucratic British Telecom and having my own life, programming my life with digital. So a great journey, nothing I would regret. It was just as I wouldn't want anything different if I was to live my life again.
What do you think DEC's legacy is to technology into the world, given that the company is no longer with us?
I think the networking is a key area where digital provided. Many of the internet standards, the developments were all made by this team under Bill Johnson and Jack Simonson over in Littleton, Massachusetts. And on the other side, the West Coast, of course, the Palo Alto Research Labs with Alta Vista. They also developed other software we didn't talk about, Millicent, sort of small, low-cost e-commerce transactions. So I think a tremendous amount of intellectual property in the world, which has gone unrecognized in many sense. That much of the internet and the networking protocols were engineered, tested, proven by digital. Digital was unsuccessful in many cases in fully commercializing them and profiting from them. But there's a great legacy I think digital will always be remembered for, particularly more in the future now than even in the present day. I think people will look back and say, well, the original network, the internet, that was based on what? It was based on PDPs. It was based on digital network. Wouldn't have happened otherwise.
So if I turn that around slightly, someone who's never heard of DEC and they're using the internet today, what should they be, they should be thankful in a way for DEC for having got us here?
I think they should, in terms of having open network protocols, because let's take IBM had Token Ring, very slow, pedantic. There was other protocols for email, X400. I mean, the telecoms industry just had no idea about lightweight protocols. Digital was in the right space. We understood Ethernet. We understood the internet, TCP/IP. We understood, indexing the web. So we have our philosophy, the DEC philosophy of the Quaker philosophy, let's put it like that, was the right one for technology today. Same in artificial intelligence. You need simple systems, neural networks have been proven the way to go. Machine learning, I was working on algorithmic systems 50 years ago. Very simple, updating adaptive algorithms. That's all you do. You don't need sophisticated control systems. So digital should be remembered for the lightweight networking protocols and making those happen for everyone at low cost, in most cases free of charge.
And that came from its engineering background?
That came from its engineering background, and not just the engineering, but the management style and the management philosophy orchestrated and initiated by Ken Olsen and the original team way back in 1957.
And a final question, what is its I think we get a sense of it, but what is the legacy for you? What has it meant for you, and what has it left you?
I feel that I've contributed to the development of technology in a practical sense, that I've speeded up the implementation of the internet in many countries, particularly in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, in a way that is ultimately beneficial to society. I mean, we often hear about this word democracy. I'm not a great believer in democracy in that way, but I think it boosts society and people's fulfillment through social media or networking. We see the guys over there, they're using their smartphones now. None of this would have happened at the speed it has without digital and its technology prowess, in my view.
That's great. I think we'll leave it there. Thank you, Gavin.
Thanks very much, Gavin.
Thank you.